The storm had no name in the administratum records, because it had not existed an hour before it killed 3,000 men. Above the ash-choked plains of Karsk Secundus, the sky tore itself open in silence, first an absence of sound so profound that voxcasters screamed with static, and every human instinct begged for cover. Lightning followed, but not the clean white forks of a natural tempest. This lightning burned crimson and sulfur gold, crawling sideways across the firmament like veins in a dying god's eye. The warp had thinned here before. It always did on worlds like this. Worlds bled dry by tithes, faith, and war. But this rupture was different. It was not hungry. It was angry. The Astra Militarum's 117th Karsk line had been dug in for weeks, trading artillery fire with a chaos warband whose banners were stitched from flayed skin and blasphemous scripture. The men knew fear. They lived inside it. They prayed through it. But when the sky split and something fell, not like a drop pod, not like a meteor, but like a judgment cast down, the front lines forgot their litanies. It hit between the trenches. The impact was not explosive. There was no concussive wave, no shrapnel storm. Instead, the ground blackened in a perfect circle, ash turning to glass under impossible heat. A sound followed then, low and grinding, like chains dragged across the bones of the world. Fire rose, not wild, not consuming, but controlled, deliberate. It burned without smoke. It burned without spreading. From the center of the circle, a shape unfolded. A motorcycle, no, something that remembered being a motorcycle, rested on molten earth. Its frame glowed with runes that were not written in any known human script, yet every man who saw them felt he understood their meaning instinctively. Guilt, debt, reckoning. Atop it sat a figure wreathed in flame. The flames pulled back from a skull. Not a helmet, not a mask. A human skull, bleached white and cracked with heat, its empty sockets burning brighter than the fires that crowned it. Chains coiled around the figure's body, clinking softly, endlessly, as if they had never known rest. Leather smoked but did not burn. The thing stood, boots hissing against glassed soil, and the air itself recoiled. Johnny Blaze did not know the name of the world he stood on. He knew only that it hurt. The spirit of vengeance surged within him, a roaring presence that had never been subtle. But here it echoed strangely, like a shout in a cathedral that answered back with 1,000 warped voices. The hellfire flickered, colors bleeding wrong at the edges, as if the flames were being argued with by reality itself. Somewhere beyond the veil, something vast and unclean took notice. The warp did not like being judged. Lasgun fire came first, reflexive, terrified. Red beams stitched across the air, splashing harmlessly against Ghost Rider's chest, dispersing like sparks on an anvil. He turned his head slowly, flames guttering as he took in the soldiers, mud-caked men clutching cheap rifles, eyes wide with the kind of fear that came from a lifetime of indoctrination suddenly failing them. They were not innocent, but they were not damned. Not yet. A horn sounded from the chaos lines. Braying laughter carried on the wind as warped Astartes charged, chainswords roaring, bolters barking. The battle resumed around the anomaly, because war in the 41st millennium did not stop for miracles. A traitor marine vaulted a trench, armor painted in screaming faces, and brought his weapon down toward a guardsman frozen in place. Ghost Rider moved. The chain uncoiled from his arm like a living thing, snapping through the air with a sound like a judge's gavel. It wrapped around the Chaos Marine's throat, hellfire racing along the links. The traitor did not scream. He howled, not in pain, but in recognition. The flames did not burn flesh first, they burned memory, crime, choice. The penance stare activated instinctively, eyes flaring as Ghost Rider pulled the traitor close. For a heartbeat, the warp pushed back. Visions clashed, atrocities layered atop one another, not as regrets, but as offerings. Each sin fed willingly to dark gods. The judgment faltered. Johnny Blaze felt it like a wrenching static in his skull. Not how this works, he growled, voice echoing like iron dragged across stone. He adjusted. The hellfire intensified, shifting hue, digging deeper, not for remorse, but for responsibility. The traitor marine collapsed into ash, armor clattering empty to the ground. The warp screamed, a psychic backlash rippling outward. Psychers miles away would later bleed from the nose and whisper of a burning skull in their dreams. The guardsmen stared. Some dropped to their knees. Others made the sign of the Aquila with shaking hands. One began to pray louder than the rest, convinced he was witnessing either the Emperor's wrath or its mockery. If you crave stories of cosmic collisions and impossible heroes, smash that subscribe button. The Emperor protects those who bear witness to the dark millennium. Ghost Rider mounted the hell cycle as artillery thundered around him. He did not look at the praying men. Faith did not interest him. Choice did. He revved the engine. The sound was wrong, too deep, layered with whispers and chains, and the crackle of eternal fire. As he accelerated, the ground blackened beneath his tires, a burning scar carved through no man's land as he rode straight into the chaos advance. Bolter shells detonated against him, exploding in gouts of shrapnel and flame. He did not slow. Each impact fed the fire, warp energy and hellfire grinding against one another like tectonic plates. Daemons clawed their way into reality and recoiled as his presence forced them into painful coherence. For the first time in 10,000 years of war, something on that battlefield was not afraid of the warp. And the warp noticed. Above, the storm tightened, lightning spiraling inward as if drawn to the rider like iron to a magnet. Somewhere far away, in chambers warded with sigils and blood, an inquisitor paused mid-sentence, suddenly cold. Somewhere else, an Eldar farseer flinched as a thread of fate ignited, burning too brightly to ignore. Ghost Rider did not see them. He saw only sinners, stretching to the horizon, and a universe that had grown fat on unpunished atrocity. The spirit of vengeance surged again, chains rattling in anticipation. This world would not understand him. That was fine. Judgment did not require permission. The battle for Karsk Secundus did not end when the flaming rider carved through the chaos advance. It fractured. What should have been a rout became confusion layered upon terror. The Chaos Warband recoiled not because it lacked numbers or firepower, but because something fundamental had been violated. Daemons that had manifested moments earlier began to unravel, their forms collapsing into shrieking motes of unreality as hellfire clung to them like a verdict they could not escape. Warp energies bled erratically, destabilized by a presence that did not bargain, did not worship, and did not belong. For the Astra Militarum, the shock was different. Guardsmen who had survived years of trench warfare found themselves staring at an impossible figure riding through gunfire, chains lashing, skull blazing brighter than the fires of bombardment. Discipline held barely. Officers screamed orders that no one truly understood. Was this a sanctioned miracle? A demonic trick? The catechisms did not cover a flaming skeleton that burned traitor Astartes to ash while ignoring loyal men entirely. Ghost Rider slowed only when the chaos lines broke, hell cycle idling amid wreckage and corpses. The ground steamed beneath him, scorched black in deliberate lines that traced his path. He dismounted again, flames dimming slightly as the spirit of vengeance recalibrated. Around him lay bodies, some burned, some untouched. Judgment had been selective. Johnny Blaze turned toward the Imperial trenches. Fear rippled through the guardsmen like a physical wave. Lasguns rose, hands shaking. Commissar Halbrecht of the 117th Karsk Line stood his ground, bolt pistol raised but not firing, jaw clenched so hard his teeth creaked. He had executed men for less hesitation than this. Now he hesitated himself. "Hold!" Halbrecht barked, voice cracking through the voxnet. "Hold your fire!" Ghost Rider took a step forward. The hellfire did not surge. The chains did not strike. He simply walked, boots crunching over glassed earth, flames casting warped shadows that stretched too long and moved too slowly. Every guardsman felt it then, not pain, not madness, but a pressure behind the eyes. Memories surfaced unbidden. A looted ration pack, a prisoner shot by accident, a moment of cowardice justified by survival. The penance stare did not activate. Not yet. Johnny Blaze could feel the spirit urging him, hungry in a way that unsettled even him. This universe overflowed with guilt. The temptation to burn it all was immense, but the pressure from the warp persisted. A constant interference, forcing restraint. Judgment, without precision here, would collapse into slaughter. He stopped at the edge of the trench. "Stand down," he said. The words were simple, spoken in a voice layered with echoes that made the air vibrate. Several men dropped their weapons outright. Others stared, transfixed, tears carving lines through the grime on their faces. Commissar Halbrecht swallowed. "In the name of the God Emperor of mankind," he began, reflexively. "Identify yourself." Ghost Rider tilted his skull slightly. The flames guttered, reacting oddly to the Emperor's title, flaring and dimming in rapid succession as if tasting a rival divinity. "I don't serve gods," Ghost Rider replied. "I punish monsters." That answer sent a ripple through the trench line far more dangerous than fear. To deny the Emperor openly, calmly, was heresy of the highest order. Halbrecht's finger tightened on the trigger. Before he could speak again, the warp screamed. Not audibly, psychically. A surviving chaos sorcerer, half buried beneath rubble, hurled a last curse, fueled by spite and warp madness. Reality twisted. A daemon forced its way through the thinning veil, malformed and furious, claws dripping unreality as it lunged straight for the trench. Ghost Rider reacted instantly. The chain snapped out, wrapping around the daemon's torso. Hellfire surged, but this time, it met resistance. The daemon shrieked in laughter even as flames engulfed it, its essence writhing rather than dissolving. "No guilt," Johnny Blaze snarled, feeling the feedback like ice down his spine. "No remorse." The daemon fought, warp energies flaring brighter, pushing back against the flames, threatening to destabilize the already damaged veil. Ghost Rider planted his boots and pulled, muscles reinforced by supernatural force, chains rattling violently. Then he changed tactics. Instead of turning the penance stare inward, he turned it outward. The hellfire flared not with judgment, but with containment. The daemon screamed as its connection to the warp constricted, its form forced into coherence it could not maintain. With a final wrench, Ghost Rider slammed it into the ground, hellfire sealing the rupture behind it. The daemon imploded, leaving nothing but scorched stone and the lingering stench of ozone and brimstone. Silence followed. Not the absence of sound, but the absence of expectation. The guardsmen stared at the smoking crater, then back at the rider who had just saved them without demanding worship or offering salvation. Commissar Halbrecht lowered his pistol slowly. "You fought the warp spawn," he said carefully. Without prayer. Ghost Rider's flames dimmed, then steadied. "Prayer doesn't make monsters pay," he replied. Above them, the storm began to dissipate, crimson lightning fading as the warp retreated. Wounded but watchful, Vox traffic crackled back to life. Reports flooded command channels of traitors routed, of daemons banished, of something impossible on the field. Far from the trenches, in a command bastion layered with auspex arrays and purity seals, a senior astropath screamed and collapsed, eyes burned white by a vision of chains and fire. The message was fragmented, but one phrase repeated through the psychic shock: "Judgment has arrived." Ghost Rider turned away from the trench line, mounting his health cycle once more. He could feel eyes on him, fearful, reverent, calculating. The Imperium would not ignore this. It never ignored anomalies that disrupted its narrative. He revved the engine, hellfire flaring as the bike responded, though sluggishly, warp interference still gnawing at its edges. As he rode off across the blasted plain, leaving scorched tracks behind him, Johnny Blaze felt something new settle into his awareness. This universe did not lack sinners. It lacked answers. And somewhere, in the endless machinery of the Imperium, Those answers were already being hunted. Word count: 1,536. The Inquisition did not arrive with thunder. It arrived with certainty. Black ships translated into high orbit over Karsk Secundus. Without fanfare, their warp signatures smothered and precise, like blades slid carefully between ribs. No planetary defense alarms sounded. No orbital challenge was issued. The commanders of the Astra Militarum received only a single, chilling data burst across secured Vox channels. Ordo Hereticus assumes command. On the surface, the war ground to a halt, not because the enemy had been defeated, but because every officer suddenly realized that survival now depended less on lasguns and more on obedience. Inquisitor Livia Cordain stood within the strategium of Bastion Theta Primus, her rosette displayed openly, daring anyone present to question her authority. She was tall, severe, her augmetic left eye clicking softly as it processed layers of tactical and metaphysical data. Purity seals hung from her armor, but they were not decorative. Each bore wards etched by sanctioned psychers, humming faintly in protest against something still lingering on the planet. "Repeat the account," she said calmly. Commissar Halbrecht stood before her, spine rigid, cap tucked beneath his arm. His voice did not shake, but it wanted to. The entity manifested during active engagement with Chaos forces. It attacked traitor Astartes and warp entities exclusively. Loyal personnel were ignored. "Ignored," Cordain repeated, tasting the word. "Yes, my lady," her augmetic eye whirred. And when challenged under the authority of the God Emperor, it denied divine allegiance. That earned murmurs from the gathered officers and priests. Cordain raised a hand, silencing them instantly. "A daemon that denies gods," she said softly. "How refreshing." A robed savant stepped forward, parchment-thin hands clutching a data slate. "Astropathic fallout suggests the anomaly caused localized warp recoil. Demonic entities experienced resistance, pain. That should not be possible." Cordain nodded once. "Nothing is impossible, only poorly categorized." She turned toward the hololithic projection dominating the chamber. It replayed fragmented pic captures, a burning rider, chains in motion, chaos marines collapsing into ash. The footage distorted whenever the skull's gaze aligned with the camera, machine spirits shrieking in corrupted Binhurik. "Deploy hunter cadres," Cordain ordered. "Null maidens, sanctioned psychers, and Adeptus Arbites kill teams. I want it located, isolated, and contained." A priest cleared his throat nervously. "Contained, my lady, or destroyed?" Cordain smiled thinly. "Those are not mutually exclusive." Across the blasted plains, Ghost Rider felt the shift before the first shot was fired. The spirit of vengeance stirred uneasily, chains tightening around his arms as if sensing a trap closing. The warp interference thickened, no longer diffuse but focused, like a lens turning toward him. This was not chaos. This was something colder, more methodical, human. The first kill team sprang the ambush near the ruins of a manufactorum, Auspex dampeners masking their approach, until bolter fire erupted from cover. Ghost Rider swerved, hell cycle skidding as mass reactive shells detonated against his flank, fire and shrapnel washing over him. He rolled, chains snapping out to pull him upright as he came to a stop amid shattered ferrocrete. "Containment protocols, Alpha 7. A voice barked over amplified vox. "Target exhibits extreme pyromantic and metaphysical resistance. Null fields activated." Ghost Rider staggered. For the first time since arriving in this universe, the hellfire dimmed sharply, flames guttering low as the air around him turned wrong, cold, empty. The spirit of vengeance snarled inside him, suddenly distant, its presence muted by the pariah aura flooding the area. "So that's how you play," Johnny Blaze growled. Bolter fire resumed. He raised his arms, chains whipping defensively, but the movements felt heavier, slower, as if the universe itself resisted him. He leapt forward anyway, chains snapping around an Arbite's trooper and yanking him from cover. The man screamed not in guilt, but in raw terror. Ghost Rider froze. The penance stare flared and faltered. The trooper's soul flared briefly in his vision. Fear, duty, violence, justified by command. Not innocent but not deserving of damnation. The hellfire recoiled, unwilling to consume. That hesitation nearly killed him. A sanctioned psyker unleashed a focused blast of warp energy, slamming Ghost Rider into a wall hard enough to crater it. Wards flared as the warp twisted, testing the hellfire's boundaries. Johnny Blaze felt pain bloom, real pain, as cracks spidered through the wall behind him. "Target destabilized!" someone shouted. Ghost Rider laughed. It was a harsh, broken sound, echoing unnaturally as he pushed himself upright. "You brought witches," he said. "Bad move." He slammed his chain into the ground. Instead of hellfire, judgment surged outward, not as flame, but as pressure. The psyker screamed as backlash tore through his mind. Visions of every life he'd condemned in service to the Imperium flooding back at once. He collapsed, bleeding from eyes and ears. The null field flickered. That was all Ghost Rider needed. Hellfire roared back, brighter and angrier than before, burning not against the warp, but around it. He vaulted forward, chain lashing, smashing weapons aside, tearing through the kill team with brutal efficiency. He did not kill them all. He burned weapons, melted armor, broke spines without consuming souls. A message, delivered in pain and terror. When it was over, Ghost Rider stood amid the wreckage, flames settling into a steady crown as he looked skyward. He could feel her then watching, calculating, already adapting. "Inquisitor?" he muttered, tasting the title pulled from the minds he'd brushed. High above, Inquisitor Cordain watched the feed cut to static. "Fascinating," she said quietly. "It restrains itself." A subordinate frowned. "My lady?" "It chooses who deserves judgment," Cordain continued. "That makes it far more dangerous than a daemon." She straightened, resolve hardening. "Prepare escalation protocols. If it will not kneel, we will define it." On the plains below, Ghost Rider mounted his hell cycle once more. The warp churned. The Imperium hunted. Chaos watched with interest. And judgment rode on. Chaos did not retreat from Karsk Secundus out of fear. It withdrew out of interest. In the eye of terror, and along the lesser warp scars bleeding into real space, whispers spread with unnatural speed. Not rumors. Daemons did not trade in uncertainty but sensations. Pain where none should exist. Judgment without bargain. Fire that did not corrupt, but clarified. The Imperium rippled, as if something alien had dipped a blade into its depths and stirred. On Karsk Secundus, the effect was immediate. The Chaos Warband that had plagued the planet for months regrouped far from Imperial lines, gathering amid the carcass of a ruined cathedral whose spires had been reshaped into screaming idols. Warp fires burned cold blue and violet as sorcerers argued in fractured tongues, trying to interpret what they had felt on the battlefield. A daemonette clawed its way fully into real space and shrieked not in pleasure, but in fury before collapsing into greasy smoke. Another followed, and another. This did not go unnoticed. A champion of chaos undivided, armor fused to his flesh, and inscribed with the blessings of multiple gods, strode into the cathedral's nave. He had faced Grey Knights. He had butchered saints. He had never hesitated before the warp's gifts. Now he hesitated. "The flames," he growled, Vox grill buzzing. "They burn memory." The sorcerer beside him twitched, eyes bleeding warp light. "Not memory," she corrected. "Responsibility. The thing does not care what you worship, only what you chose." That truth rippled outward, and somewhere beyond mortal comprehension, something ancient laughed. Ghost Rider felt them coming long before they arrived. He stood at the edge of a shattered hive district, flames low, chains slack, hell cycle idling, as the spirit of vengeance stirred restlessly. The warp interference had changed again. No longer hostile pressure, No longer imperial suppression, this was curiosity, hunger sharpened by caution. "You want to test me?" Johnny Blaze said softly. The ground cracked. Daemons erupted into real space, not in a ragged surge, but in formation. Bloodletters first, snarling and brandishing hellblades that steamed where they cut the air. Behind them, warp beasts that defied taxonomy slithered and crawled, their forms shifting as reality struggled to define them. Overhead, a greater daemon began to force itself through, its presence crushing, triumphant. Ghost Rider mounted the hell cycle. The engine's roar rolled across the ruins like thunder wrapped in chains. Hellfire surged, brighter than before, reacting violently to the warp's proximity. The flames licked outward, and for a moment Johnny Blaze felt the spirit of vengeance strain pulled in two directions, its ancient mandate grinding against the Imperium's mutable rules. "Stay with me," he muttered. The first bloodletter charged. Ghost Rider met it head-on. The impact was catastrophic. The hell cycle plowed through demonic flesh, chains snapping out in all directions as Ghost Rider rode through the horde, hellfire tearing daemons apart at a metaphysical level. They screamed not the ecstatic howls of war, but high, panicked shrieks as judgment found purchase. One daemon locked eyes with him. The penance stare flared, and for the first time, it failed. There was nothing there. No guilt, no remorse, no reflection. The daemon's essence was hunger and obedience, nothing more. The stare slid off it like water off oil. Ghost Rider snarled and backhanded the creature with a flaming chain, tearing it apart physically instead. "Fine," he growled. "We'll do this the hard way." The greater daemon completed its emergence then, towering over the ruins, wings scraping the sky as warp energy cascaded off it in waves. It laughed, a sound that made buildings crumble. "Judge me," it boomed, mockery thick in every syllable. "I am beyond sin." Ghost Rider skidded to a stop and looked up at it. "You're right," he said. The daemon faltered, confused. "You don't feel guilt," Ghost Rider continued. "You don't regret. You don't choose." The hellfire changed. It burned white. Chains whipped outward, wrapping around the daemon's limbs, anchoring it to reality with brutal force. The flames did not seek guilt. They sought accountability. The daemon shrieked as the fire forced it into coherence. Every act committed through it, every soul consumed, every war it had fueled made painfully present. The warp convulsed. Psychers across the planet screamed as the Imperium recoiled, pressure waves ripping through unseen dimensions. The daemon fought, clawing at the chains, warp energy surging, but Ghost Rider held firm, boots digging into the ground as cracks spidered outward beneath him. "You cannot judge the warp," the daemon roared. "I'm not," Ghost Rider replied. "I'm judging you." With a final wrench, he pulled. The daemon did not explode. It did not banish cleanly. It collapsed, folding inward as the hellfire consumed not its form, but its impact on reality. The warp screamed again, louder this time, a psychic howl that echoed far beyond Karsk Secundus. When the fire faded, nothing remained. Silence fell. The remaining daemons fled, not routed, not banished. They ran, tearing themselves back into the warp with frantic desperation, fleeing a battlefield where judgment had teeth. Ghost Rider stood alone amid the ruins, flames slowly dimming as the spirit of vengeance settled. He felt the cost, then a deep, grinding fatigue, like a muscle strained beyond comfort. The warp had resisted, adapted, pushed back, but it had learned something too. Far away, Inquisitor Cordain received the astropathic reports in stunned silence. Demonic casualties, warp instability, a greater entity destroyed without ritual, prayer, or sanction. Her augmetic eye clicked rapidly. "He makes them afraid," she murmured. Elsewhere still, an Eldar Farseer traced burning threads through the skein of fate and whispered a single word in ancient awe: anathema. On Karsk Secundus, Ghost Rider mounted his hell cycle once more. He did not feel victorious. He felt watched. The warp was no longer merely reacting. It was preparing. The warp did not retaliate immediately. That, more than anything, unsettled Ghost Rider. Days passed across the scarred surface of Karsk Secundus, with no mass demonic incursions, no screaming tears in reality, no sudden surges of empiric pressure. The storms faded into sickly clouds. The battlefield cooled. Even the howling psychic background noise dulled to a low, constant thrum, like a predator breathing just out of sight. The warp was learning. Johnny Blaze felt it every time the hellfire flared. Where it had once resisted, blindly surging, recoiling, screaming it now tested. Flames bent at odd angles. Chains dragged a fraction slower through the air. The spirit of vengeance still burned hot within him, but its connection stuttered, as if the Imperium were attempting to interpret, catalog, and eventually counter what he represented. For the first time since his arrival, Ghost Rider moved carefully. He abandoned the open plains and ruined hives, riding instead through the corpse-choked undercities and abandoned transit tunnels where the warp's influence thinned. The Hell Cycle's engine growled softly, fire casting long shadows over rusted walls etched with imperial propaganda and heretical graffiti alike. The air smelled of promethium residue, old blood, and the faint metallic tang of fear that never truly left this world. Imperial patrols avoided him now, not because they had been ordered to, though they had, but because proximity felt dangerous. Voxcasters malfunctioned when he passed. Auspex readings spiked and died. Men reported intrusive thoughts, memories surfacing unbidden. Ghost Rider did not pursue them. Survival guilt was not damnation, but something else stalked him. It began as distortion, flickers at the edge of vision, whispers without language, shadows that did not align with their sources. Then came the dreams. Even Ghost Rider slept, in his way, the spirit of vengeance receding just enough for Johnny Blaze's mind to surface. In those moments, the warp spoke, not with words, with offers. Visions bled into one another. A galaxy scoured clean, daemons screaming as hellfire judged without restraint, chains binding not sinners but gods. The warp itself reshaped, ordered, made to answer. The temptation was not corruption, it was efficiency. You could end this, the whispers implied. Why punish endlessly when you could conclude? Johnny Blaze woke each time with flames flaring violently, chains rattling as he forced the spirit back into equilibrium. That's not justice, he growled to the empty tunnels. That's control. The answer did not argue. It adapted. The confrontation came without warning. Ghost Rider emerged from a transit shaft into a dead manufactorum yard just as the air thickened, reality shuddering like a muscle under strain. The hellfire dimmed sharply. Flames pulled inward as if smothered by an unseen hand. The spirit of vengeance recoiled, not in pain, but in confusion. The warp had changed the rules. A figure manifested opposite him, not a daemon in any traditional sense, but a construct of belief and reaction. Its shape shifted constantly, part robed scholar, part horned beast, part burning silhouette that mirrored Ghost Rider's own form in mockery. Warp light rippled across its surface like oil on water. You are being defined, it said, voice layered and calm. And definition invites limitation. Ghost Rider dismounted slowly, chains coiling tighter around his arms. You're not here to fight, he said. No, the entity agreed. I am here to measure. It raised a hand, and the warp surged not outward, but inward, pressing against Ghost Rider like crushing gravity. The hellfire flared, then sputtered, burning at reduced intensity as if fuel were being leached away. Johnny Blaze felt the strain immediately, every movement heavier. The spirit's presence dimmed, but not gone. This universe adapts, the entity continued. It has survived gods, devourers, and empires. You are merely novel. Ghost Rider laughed, the sound harsh and defiant. You think I haven't heard that before? He snapped a chain forward. It struck the entity and passed through it, hellfire dispersing uselessly as the warp construct dissolved and reformed unharmed. No guilt, Johnny Blaze muttered. No choice. The entity inclined its shifting head. Correct. Therefore, your primary function fails. The pressure increased. Cracks spidered through the ground as Ghost Rider dropped to one knee, flames guttering dangerously low. For a moment, just a moment, the spirit of vengeance felt distant, its roar reduced to an echo. The warp leaned closer. You can persist, it offered. Adapt, judge selectively, accept inefficiency, or you can integrate. Ghost Rider forced himself upright, chains clanking as he stood. His skull burned brighter, flames flaring as he reached inward, not outward, to anchor himself. The spirit of vengeance responded, not with fury, but with clarity. I don't integrate, Ghost Rider said. I endure. The hellfire surged, not brighter, but denser. It no longer lashed wildly at the warp pressure, but pressed back in kind, focused and deliberate. Johnny Blaze changed his approach again, just as he had with the daemons. Instead of judging the entity, he judged the space it occupied. The pennant stare flared, not seeking guilt, but causality. The warp construct shrieked, not in pain, but in disruption as the fire forced its actions, its consequences, into coherence. The pressure snapped like a broken tendon. The entity recoiled, its form destabilizing. You learn quickly, it hissed, fragments tearing away into unreality. So does this universe, Ghost Rider replied. The construct vanished, leaving scorched air and a sudden absence of warp pressure that made the world feel unnervingly quiet. Ghost Rider staggered, catching himself on one knee as the flames dimmed to a steady glow. The cost lingered. He felt it in the spirit's reduced resonance, in the way the warp now watched instead of surged. This was no longer a matter of simple resistance. The Imperium was categorizing him, building frameworks, searching for counters. Far above, in orbit, Inquisitor Cordain studied fresh data with growing unease. Warp fluctuations were stabilizing around the anomaly, not spiking. Patterns were emerging. He's forcing adaptation, she said softly, on both sides. Elsewhere, chaos took note. Eldar threads twisted tighter, and deep within the warp, something ancient and amused observed the rider with new interest. Judgment had not been rejected. It had been acknowledged. The Eldar did not approach Ghost Rider as hunters. They approached him as surgeons. Their arrival on Karsk Secundus went unnoticed by Imperial auspex and inquisitorial surveillance alike, not because those systems failed, but because the Eldar never triggered them. Reality folded around their skimmercraft like silk drawn aside, leaving no wake in the warp, no echo of passage. To human perception, nothing had changed until it already had. Ghost Rider sensed them before he saw them. The warp interference shifted again, not tightening like a snare or pressing like a tide, but parting. Threads of probability slid aside, opening a corridor of unsettling calm. The hellfire dimmed instinctively, reacting not with hostility, but with caution. The spirit of vengeance did not recognize the presence as prey. That alone made Johnny Blaze tense. He stood amid the skeleton of a collapsed spire, chains loose but ready, skull turning slowly as three figures emerged from the distortion. Their armor gleamed like polished bone in moonlight, every curve deliberate, every surface etched with runes that hummed softly against the warp's background noise. Their helms concealed their faces, but Ghost Rider felt their attention like needles pressed against his thoughts. One stepped forward. "Be at ease, Flamewalker," the Eldar said, voice smooth and musical, layered with harmonics that made the air vibrate. "If we wished you destroyed, you would not perceive us at all." Ghost Rider snorted. "That's supposed to make me comfortable?" "No," the Eldar replied. "It is meant to be accurate." The spirit of vengeance stirred, chains tightening slightly. Johnny Blaze resisted the urge to strike. These were not Imperials with guns and fear. These beings understood the warp, and more dangerously, they understood consequence. "What do you want?" Ghost Rider asked. The Eldar inclined its head. "Understanding. You burn where the warp should not burn. You judge where judgment destabilizes fate. That makes you problematic. Story of my life. A second Eldar stepped forward, staff crackling with contained psychic energy. You are not of this skein, she said. Yet you pull upon it regardless. Entire futures collapse around your choices. Ghost Rider felt that then, not accusation, but truth. Every act of judgment here sent ripples outward, intersecting with prophecy, survival calculus, extinction curves. This universe did not operate on individual morality. It operated on scale. And you're here to tell me to stop? He asked. The first Eldar shook his head. No. We are here to tell you what happens if you don't learn. With a gesture, the Farseer opened a vision. Ghost Rider staggered as the world fell away, replaced by branching paths of possibility. He saw himself riding across battlefields, hellfire unrestrained, daemons collapsing, imperial worlds purged in righteous flame. He saw the Imperium respond with escalation, exterminatus protocols triggered not against chaos, but against him. He saw chaos adapt, birthing entities shaped specifically to resist judgment, hollow constructs immune to accountability. And beyond that, he saw something worse. A galaxy where judgment became a constant pressure, not a response. Where entire civilizations burned not because they were guilty, but because they might become so. Fate tightened into a noose. You become predictable, the Farseer said gently. And in this universe, predictability is death. The vision collapsed. Ghost Rider stood rigid, flames flaring unevenly as the warp interference spiked and settled. He clenched his fists, chains rattling softly. You think I don't know that line? He said. I've walked it before. Yes, the Eldar replied. And each time, your universe ended. That struck deeper than any blade. Johnny Blaze turned away, staring out across the blasted cityscape. So what? He said quietly. You want me to pull my punches? Let monsters keep winning because fate says so? No, the Eldar said. We want you to choose where to burn. The third figure spoke for the first time, voice sharp as cut crystal. There are nodes in fate, pressure points, wars that echo forward into extinction or survival. Judge there, not everywhere. Ghost Rider looked back at them. And who decides which wars matter? A pause. Then, you do, the first Eldar answered. That is the danger. The spirit of vengeance surged uneasily. This was not defiance or temptation. It was responsibility, a burden heavier than damnation. And if I refuse? Ghost Rider asked. The Farseer's gaze hardened. Then the warp will finish adapting. And when it does, even you will burn. Silence stretched. Johnny Blaze exhaled slowly, flames dimming as he weighed the choice. Endless judgment versus targeted intervention. Righteous fire versus strategic restraint. Neither felt clean. Fine, he said at last. I'll listen. The Eldar inclined their heads as one. Then listen well, the Farseer said. The Imperium hunts you. Chaos studies you. But there are others who see you as something else entirely. She gestured, and a new thread flared, in Ghost Rider's perception green and brutal, pulsing with crude enthusiasm. Orcs, Johnny Blaze muttered. Yes, the Eldar confirmed. They do not feel guilt. They do not fear damnation. But they understand strength. They will test you endlessly. Ghost Rider's flames flickered, almost amused. Let them. The Farseer lowered her staff. One more thing, Flamewalker. The warp now recognizes you as a fixed variable. It will no longer react blindly. I figured, Ghost Rider replied. When next it moves against you, she continued, it will do so intelligently. The Eldar began to fade, reality folding around them once more. Before they vanished entirely, the first paused. You are not an anathema, he said. You are a catalyst. Whether this galaxy survives that remains uncertain. They were gone. Ghost Rider stood alone again, the warp settling into its familiar, hostile murmur. He mounted his hell cycle, engine growling low as hellfire steadied. Targeted judgment. Selective fire. Not because fate demanded it, but because this universe would break otherwise. Somewhere in the distance, crude laughter echoed across the plains, carried on smoke and gunfire. Johnny Blaze turned the hell cycle toward it. "Guess I've got my next lesson," he said. The refugee camp was never meant to exist. It had formed in the shadow of Hive Lathrix's outer walls, a sprawl of canvas, scrap metal, and half-collapsed hab units pressed together by desperation rather than design. The Administratum had not sanctioned it. The Munitorum had not supplied it. Officially, the population of the sector had already been accounted for in casualty tallies and labor requisitions. Unofficially, tens of thousands still breathed, starved, and waited. Ghost Rider rode into the camp at dusk. The Hell Cycle's flames were muted now, kept deliberately low, its engine growling softly as he slowed to a crawl. The spirit of vengeance stirred uneasily, chains tightening and loosening as if uncertain. There was guilt here, thick, cloying, but it was tangled, layered with fear, ignorance, and necessity in a way that made judgment treacherous. People saw him anyway. Whispers rippled through the camp, faster than panic ever could. Mothers pulled children close. Old men crossed themselves in half-remembered gestures of imperial faith. A few brave or foolish souls dropped to their knees outright, convinced the Emperor's wrath had finally found them. Ghost Rider dismounted slowly. "Stay where you are," he said, voice echoing but controlled. "I'm not here for you." That did not help. A man stumbled forward, gaunt and filthy, eyes wide with a terror that bordered on hysteria. "We didn't have a choice," he shouted. "They came at night, the cultists. They said they'd kill our families if we didn't help. We just pointed. That's all." The words hit Ghost Rider like a hammer. The spirit of vengeance surged, hellfire flaring instinctively as guilt flared bright in his vision. Not a single soul here was clean. They had fed chaos with silence, with fear, with compliance. In another universe, that would have been enough. In this one, it was survival. Johnny Blaze clenched his fists, chains rattling softly as he fought the urge to let judgment loose indiscriminately. This was the line the Eldar had warned him about, the place where punishment became extinction. "Where are they now?" he asked. The man swallowed hard. "The cult? Gone. Imperial patrols purged them weeks ago, burned the hab blocks with everyone inside." Ghost Rider felt the weight of that settle into his bones. The Imperium's solution. Efficient. Final. And now the survivors waited here, already condemned by logistics, if not by law. A child cried somewhere in the crowd. Another joined in. The spirit of vengeance recoiled slightly, its hunger tempered by something dangerously close to empathy. Then the shooting started. Auto gunfire ripped through the camp's perimeter as a renegade militia force surged from cover, armored in mismatched gear bearing no clear allegiance. Deserters, scavengers, predators who had learned that refugees were easier prey than fortified positions. Panic exploded. Ghost Rider moved without thinking. The hell cycle roared to life, flames flaring as he accelerated straight into the attackers, chains snapping outward with brutal precision. Bullets sparked harmlessly against him as he plowed through the first line, knocking men aside with bone-shattering force. He did not burn them immediately. He looked at them. The penance stare flared. These men screamed as their sins reflected back at them, not coerced compromises, but chosen cruelty, theft, murder, rape, enjoyment. Hellfire consumed them quickly, efficiently, leaving scorched ground and smoking weapons behind. The rest broke and ran. Ghost Rider skidded to a halt at the camp's edge, flames dimming as silence fell once more. The refugees stared, stunned, watching ash drift where their would-be killers had stood moments before. A woman stepped forward hesitantly, clutching a child to her chest. Are we next?" she whispered. Johnny Blaze looked at her for a long moment. He could see it, the guilt, yes, but also the weight of impossible choices, of living in a universe that punished hesitation as harshly as cruelty. "No," he said finally. "Not today." Relief collapsed through the camp like a wave. Some wept openly, others laughed, hysterical and broken. Ghost Rider turned away before any of them could thank him. Gratitude made judgment harder. He mounted the Hell Cycle and rode out, just as Imperial gunships crested the horizon, their silhouettes sharp against the darkening sky. Inquisitor Cordain watched the feed with narrowed eyes. "He spared them," she said softly. A subordinate frowned. "My lady, they aided chaos. By Imperial law." "By Imperial law, entire worlds are guilty," Cordain cut in. "This thing operates by a different metric." She leaned back, fingers steepled. "And that makes it unpredictable." Back in the ruins, Ghost Rider rode alone. The spirit of vengeance, restless but quiet. He had chosen restraint. The galaxy had not ended, but the cost lingered, heavy and unresolved. Some sins would go unpunished. For now, the Adeptus Mechanicus did not see Ghost Rider as a miracle, a daemon, or a moral variable. They saw him as a problem of classification. On Karsk Secundus, classification always preceded dissection. Beneath the surface of the planet, far below the refugee camps and ruined hives, the forges of Magos Explorator Helix 9 thrummed with sacred industry. Plasma furnaces roared behind layers of adamantine. Servo-skulls drifted through incense-choked air, chanting Binharic prayers as data streamed endlessly across hololithic arrays. Here, flesh was secondary. Meaning was secondary. Only function mattered. Ghost Rider entered the forge complex because the warp pushed him there. Not violently, not with threat, with absence. As he rode through a tunnel mouth that should have collapsed decades ago, the warp interference thinned to almost nothing. Hellfire steadied, chains loosening slightly as the spirit of vengeance settled into a wary equilibrium. The place felt insulated, wrapped in something cold and absolute. "Null fields," Johnny Blaze muttered. "Smart." Automated turrets tracked him but did not fire. Servo arms retracted. Gates parted with hydraulic sighs. Machine spirits murmuring in tones that brushed Ghost Rider's awareness like insects against glass. This was not an ambush. It was an invitation. He dismounted in the heart of the forge chamber. Flames dimmed deliberately as he stood amid towering engines and suspended mechanical limbs the size of gunships. Rows of tech priests watched from balconies, red robes swaying as augmetics clicked and whirred. At their center stood Helix 9, his body more machine than man, optic lenses irising in rapid focus. Anomaly acknowledged. The Magos intoned, voice layered with Vox echo and Binharic subtext. Designation: Rider pattern entity. Request: non-hostile engagement. Ghost Rider crossed his arms, chains settling with a metallic clink. "You've got 5 seconds, he said. "After that, I start burning answers out of people." Helix 9 did not react. "Temporal tolerance acceptable," he replied. "Purpose: analysis." A dozen mechadendrites extended, each tipped with scanners, psi-reactive auspex, and arcane sensors tuned to detect warp flux, thermal output, and soul energy variance. Ghost Rider felt them brush his aura, probing, measuring. The spirit of vengeance bristled. "Careful," Johnny Blaze warned. "Some things don't like being touched." "Noted," Helix 9 said. "Observation: your flames do not consume material energy. They transmute metaphysical states. Hypothesis: hellfire equals executable judgment protocol." Ghost Rider snorted. "That's one way to put it." Helix 9 tilted his head fractionally. Clarification requested. "Is judgment inherent to your existence, or a function you perform?" Johnny Blaze hesitated. No one had ever asked it like that. "It's what I am," he said finally, "and what I do." Contradiction acknowledged. Helix 9 replied calmly, "If function defines form, replication becomes possible." The words landed like a thunderclap. Ghost Rider's flames flared sharply, chains rattling as he took a step forward. "Say that again," he growled. Helix 9 did not retreat. "Your universe-bound judgment engine is inefficient," the Magos continued. "Limited throughput, subject to interference by warp variables and pariah effects. If isolated, mapped, and integrated into Mechanicus doctrine, scalable judgment becomes achievable. Johnny Blaze felt the spirit of vengeance surge violently, hellfire flaring brighter than it had since his arrival. "You're talking about copying this," he said, tapping his chest. "Putting it in machines." "Correct," Helix 9 said. "Imagine a titan whose fire burns guilt from populations. Imagine compliance achieved without prolonged war. Imagine sin quantified, punished, eliminated." For a moment, just a moment, the warp whispered approval. Ghost Rider crushed it instantly. "You don't get it," he said, voice low and dangerous. "Judgment isn't a weapon you mass-produce. It's a burden, one you clearly don't understand." Helix 9's lenses flickered. "Understanding is not required for function." That was the line. Ghost Rider moved. The chain snapped out, wrapping around a massive plasma conduit instead of the Magos himself. He yanked, tearing it free in a shower of sparks as alarms blared and machine spirits screamed in Binharic distress. The hellfire surged, not to destroy, but to threaten, flames licking close enough to scorch steel without melting it. "You take this," Ghost Rider said, gesturing to the fire, "and you strip out choice, context, mercy. You turn judgment into extermination with better math." Helix 9 processed rapidly. Counterpoint: mercy produces inefficiency. Ghost Rider leaned closer, skull blazing. "So does survival. This universe still bothers with it." For the first time, Helix 9 hesitated. "New data acquired," the Magos said slowly. "You limit your output deliberately." "Yeah," Johnny Blaze replied. "Because someone has to." The forge shook as Ghost Rider released the conduit, letting it crash back into place. Flames dimmed, chains settling once more. The tech priests did not move. They were afraid, but more than that, they were curious. Helix 9 inclined his head. Conclusion: direct replication infeasible. Ethical variables introduce instability. "Good," Ghost Rider said. "Because if you tried, I'd burn this place to bedrock." Statement acknowledged. As Ghost Rider turned to leave, Helix 9 spoke again. "Query," the Magos said. "If judgment cannot be mechanized, why persist at all?" Johnny Blaze paused at the threshold, Hell Cycle engine rumbling softly. "Because someone has to carry it," he said. "And because machines don't feel the weight." He rode out, the gates sealing behind him as the warp interference returned, heavier now, more deliberate. The Mechanicus had learned. They always did. But so had he. Judgment without restraint was tyranny. Judgment without humanity was extinction. And this universe had enough of both. Chaos did not approach Ghost Rider with violence. It approached him with understanding. The first sign was silence, not the uneasy quiet of a battlefield after slaughter, but the deliberate absence of intrusion. The warp around Ghost Rider smoothed, its usual psychic turbulence flattening into something almost serene. Whispers faded, pressure eased. For the first time since his arrival in the 41st millennium, the Imperium did not resist his presence. It welcomed it. Ghost Rider slowed the Hell Cycle as he crossed into a region the Imperium had long since abandoned. No banners marked this territory, no Vox signals reached it. The ruins here were ancient, predating the current conflict, their stones etched with symbols worn smooth by time and war alike. The air smelled clean, in a way that felt wrong. "Yeah," Johnny Blaze muttered. "This is a trap." The spirit of vengeance stirred uneasily, chains tightening around his arms as hellfire flickered, but did not flare. The warp was behaving. That alone was cause for suspicion. At the center of the ruins stood a single figure. He was human, or close enough to make the distinction unsettling. Tall, broad-shouldered, clad in armor that bore no single mark of allegiance, yet carried echoes of all four ruinous powers without fully committing to any. His face was unhelmed, handsome in a predatory way, eyes burning with intelligence rather than madness. He smiled when Ghost Rider dismounted. "Johnny Blaze," the man said warmly. Or is it spirit of vengeance? You wear both names so comfortably. Ghost Rider's flames flared a fraction. You know me, he said flatly. Of course, the figure replied. You've been very educational. The warp coiled subtly around the man, not corrupting him, but supporting him. This was no daemon, no mindless cultist. This was a champion one who had lasted long enough to understand the rules of survival. You're not here to fight, Ghost Rider said. No, the champion agreed. I'm here to negotiate. That made Ghost Rider laugh, a harsh sound that echoed off the ruined stones. Chaos doesn't negotiate. Chaos adapts, the man corrected. Just like you. He gestured, and the ruins around them shimmered. Visions rose from the warp battlefields Ghost Rider had already walked, daemons burning, traitors judged. Then, new images layered over them. Chaos forces redirecting wars away from civilian populations, cult uprisings collapsing before they reached critical mass, daemons bound, not unleashed. You are inefficient, the champion said calmly, but effective. And more importantly, you are selective. Ghost Rider felt the weight of the words. Spit it out. The champion nodded. An accord. You judge those who deserve it, true monsters, irredeemable horrors. In return, chaos ceases interference with your power. No more warp resistance. No more adaptation. The warp around them pulsed in agreement. Johnny Blaze felt it immediately, the spirit of vengeance, responding to the promise like a muscle suddenly freed from restraint. Hellfire flared brighter, steadier, purer than it had been since his arrival. Chains loosened, eager. And the price? Ghost Rider asked. The champion's smile widened. Restraint. You do not burn everything. You do not dismantle the great game. You become a specialist. Ghost Rider stared at him. You want me on a leash. A partnership, the champion corrected. We eliminate inefficiency together. Chaos thrives on extremes. You punish those who go too far, even by our standards. For a moment, the offer hung in the air, heavy and tempting. Ghost Rider felt it not as corruption, but as relief. The warp's pressure eased further, hellfire roaring at full strength without resistance. This universe would be easier like this. Cleaner, fewer compromises, fewer refugee camps, fewer moral stalemates. The spirit of vengeance surged, eager. Johnny Blaze clenched his fists. And when the Imperium slaughters a world in my name, he asked quietly, when they point at me and say, see, even hell agrees with us? The champion shrugged. That happens anyway. Ghost Rider stepped closer, skull blazing brighter. And when chaos decides my definition of too far is inconvenient? The warp pulsed again, less certain this time. The champion's eyes narrowed slightly. Then we renegotiate. That was the lie. Ghost Rider saw it then, not guilt, but intent. Chaos did not plan to betray him immediately. It planned to normalize him, turn judgment into infrastructure, make him part of the system. Just another tool. Johnny Blaze straightened, flames flaring higher as he made his decision. No, he said. The word landed like a gunshot. The warp shuddered. The champion frowned. Think carefully, he warned. You could end so much suffering by becoming what caused it, Ghost Rider replied. The hellfire surged not wildly, but decisively. Chains snapped outward, wrapping around the champion's torso before he could react. Warp energy flared as the man struggled, eyes blazing with sudden fury. You think you're above this? The champion snarled. You're already playing our game. Ghost Rider yanked him closer, skull inches from the man's face. The penance stare flared, not seeking guilt, but choice. And there it was. Every compromise. Every world sacrificed strategically. Every moment where this man had known better and chosen power anyway. The hellfire roared, consuming not just flesh, but authority, the champion's influence collapsing inward as warp support withdrew in a violent backlash. The champion screamed as chaos abandoned him, his body burning to ash in seconds. The warp screamed with him. The pressure returned instantly, heavier than before, enraged and offended. The bargain had been rejected. Worse, it had been answered. Ghost Rider staggered slightly as the backlash hit, flames flickering but holding. He exhaled slowly, chains settling as the spirit of vengeance stabilized. "Yeah," he muttered. "I figured that'd make things worse." Far away, Inquisitor Cordain received fragmented astropathic reports of a massive warp spike followed by sudden collapse. Chaos assets destabilized. A high-ranking champion erased. "He refused them," she said quietly. Somewhere else, an Eldar Farseer closed her eyes in grim satisfaction. And deep within the warp, ancient intelligences shifted. No longer curious. Now, they were hostile. Ghost Rider mounted the Hell Cycle, engine roaring as hellfire flared against the renewed resistance. He rode out of the ruins, knowing one thing with absolute certainty. There would be no shortcuts. Judgment in this universe would be paid for in full. The declaration came without ceremony. Excommunicate extremis. The words rippled outward from inquisitorial vox relays and astropathic choirs alike, encoded in cipher, prayer, and threat. On Karsk, Secundus, and beyond, Imperial commanders received the order with a mix of relief and dread. Relief because ambiguity had ended. Dread because what replaced it was a mandate to destroy something that had already humbled chaos. Ghost Rider felt it the moment the decree was spoken, not as sound or signal, but as intent. The warp tightened, Imperial psychic pressure layering over it like a suffocating shroud. Faith surged, not worshipful, but hostile. Billions of minds, trained to fear the heretic and the witch, aligned unconsciously against him. "Guess that answers that," Johnny Blaze muttered. The first kill zone was textbook Imperial efficiency, a valley of broken manufactoria, its approaches seeded with mines and overlapping fire lanes. Null field emitters hummed beneath camouflaged plating. Gunships waited beyond visual range. And at the center, a single armored figure stood in the open, rosette blazing openly against her chest. Inquisitor Livia Cordain did not hide. Ghost Rider rolled into the valley at a controlled pace, Hell Cycle flames low, chains slack but ready. He stopped 20 meters from Cordain and dismounted slowly, skull turning as he took in the trap. "You could have just asked me to leave," he said. Cordain's augmetic eye clicked softly. "You refused every other form of control," she replied. This was inevitable. Around them, weapons tracked. Targeting spirits whispered. Null fields intensified, pressing against Ghost Rider's aura like cold hands. "You've seen what chaos offered me," Johnny Blaze said. "You know I turned it down." "Yes," Cordain agreed. "And that makes you more dangerous, not less." She raised a hand. The valley erupted. Las cannons fired in coordinated volleys, beams slicing through the air as bolter fire stitched the ground. Null fields flared to maximum output, hellfire dimming sharply as Ghost Rider leapt aside, chains snapping out to pull him clear of overlapping kill zones. Explosions rocked the valley, throwing up walls of dust and debris. Ghost Rider hit the ground hard, rolling to his feet as pain flared, real pain, through his frame. The spirit of vengeance strained against the suppression, its presence muffled, but not gone. "You're making a mistake," he called out. Cordain's voice echoed over amplified vox. "You are a variable this galaxy cannot afford." Ghost Rider surged forward anyway. He rode through the fire, Hell Cycle roaring as he used speed and unpredictability to break the trap's geometry. Chains lashed, tearing emplacements apart. But he did not kill. He shattered weapons, disabled emitters, burned circuitry without igniting souls. Cordain watched, jaw tightening. "He's not retaliating proportionally," an aide whispered. "No," Cordain replied. "He's disengaging." Ghost Rider reached the valley's edge and did not turn back. He accelerated hard, Hell Cycle leaping over a collapsing ridge as gunship fire tore up the ground behind him. Moments later, he vanished into the wasteland beyond Imperial sensor range. Silence fell over the kill zone. Cordain exhaled slowly. "He's gone rogue," she said. "Issue sector-wide alert. Independent classification. Priority pursuit." "But my lady," the aide hesitated, "he didn't attack you." "That," Cordain replied coldly, "is not mercy, it's defiance." Ghost Rider rode for days without stopping. He did not head toward Imperial space or Chaos strongholds. He cut across forgotten routes, dead worlds, and pirate-haunted corridors where authority was thin and survival brutal. The warp followed, restless and angry, but the Imperium's psychic pressure faded with distance. For the first time since arriving, Johnny Blaze was alone by choice. The freedom was unsettling. Without a faction pressing demands or offering bargains, judgment became harder, not easier. There was no clear enemy banner to burn, no doctrine to defy, just scattered violence, petty tyrants, and endless small horrors. On a dead moon, he broke a slaver ring and left the survivors alive. Weapons melted, fear etched deep. In a drifting void station, he judged a pirate lord whose cruelty fed on desperation, burning him to ash while the crew fled. Each act rippled outward, consequences unfolding without his guidance. This was the cost of independence. One night, if the words still applied, Ghost Rider stopped atop a ridge overlooking a distant city, its lights flickering weakly under a polluted sky. He dismounted and stood still, flames low, chains quiet. "I'm not fixing this," Johnny Blaze said aloud. The spirit of vengeance stirred, acknowledging the truth without judgment. The warp whispered again, not offers this time, but irritation. The Imperium hunted, Chaos plotted, Xenos watched, and Ghost Rider stood between them all, belonging to none. He mounted the hell cycle and turned away from the city. Not every sin could be addressed. Not every horror demanded his fire. The Eldar had been right. Nodes mattered. Pressure points. Choices. As he rode into the dark, a new pattern began to form. Reports spread of a burning skull that struck without warning and vanished without claiming territory. Of wars disrupted, not won. Of monsters destroyed, not replaced. Factions adjusted, uncertain how to respond to a force that refused allegiance and rejected control. Ghost Rider did not hear those reports. He felt them, and somewhere in the vast, uncaring galaxy, the balance shifted not toward hope, not toward damnation, but toward something far more dangerous: unpredictability. The war for the Helior Reach had no innocent side. That was why Ghost Rider came. The sector lay far from major Imperial trade routes, a ragged cluster of systems whose value lay not in resources, but in position. Warp currents converged here, making it a crossroads for fleets that wished to move unseen. Over centuries, that had turned Helior Reach into a killing ground claimed and reclaimed by different powers, each leaving scars deeper than the last. When Ghost Rider arrived, three forces were already locked in a grinding stalemate. An Imperial Crusade fleet held the inner worlds, its commanders desperate to prove loyalty after recent purges. Chaos warbands infested the outer systems, feeding on prolonged conflict and civilian suffering. And between them, an Orc Wah surged and receded like a tidal force, drawn to the endless fighting with joyful enthusiasm. Billions were dying. Most of them mattered to no one. Ghost Rider watched from the edge of real space as his hell cycle idled atop the hull of a drifting wreck, flames casting long reflections across twisted metal. The spirit of vengeance pulsed steadily, not frantic now, but focused. This was the kind of war the Eldar had warned him about, one whose continuation guaranteed extinction, but whose resolution required choosing how the blood stopped flowing. "There's no clean cut here," Johnny Blaze murmured. The warp agreed, whispering nothing useful. He entered Helior Reach, like a blade slid between ribs. The first strike fell on an Imperial command ship coordinating orbital bombardments against a contested hive world. Ghost Rider tore through void shields with hellfire that burned authority rather than matter, chains ripping open bulkheads as alarms screamed. He did not slaughter the crew. He went straight for the stratagem. Admiral Verox barely had time to stand before Ghost Rider, seized him by the collar, and dragged him close, skull blazing inches from his face. You authorize saturation fire on HAB levels, Ghost Rider said calmly. Why? Varrock stammered. Containment! If we let the infection spread, the penance stare flared. Varrock screamed as every civilian casualty, every falsified report, every moment of willful ignorance crashed back into him at once. Hellfire consumed him completely, leaving nothing but ash and a command throne suddenly very empty. Ghost Rider severed the ship's command nexus and vanished before security teams arrived. Without centralized orders, the Imperial fleet faltered, bombardments halting as confusion rippled outward. Chaos reacted within hours. A warlord of Khorne challenged the Rider openly, broadcasting a sector-wide Vox challenge from a daemon-forged flagship. Ghost Rider answered by riding straight through the vessel's hull, hellfire roaring as he carved a path of destruction toward the bridge. The warlord met him in single combat, roaring with bloodlust as chain axes and hellfire clashed. The fight shook the ship, warp energy surging violently as the two forces collided. Ghost Rider won, but not cleanly. The warlord felt no guilt. The penance stare did nothing. Johnny Blaze had to burn him down piece by piece, hellfire tearing through demonic reinforcement again and again until the vessel itself began to collapse. Ghost Rider escaped moments before it imploded, the explosion ripping a hole in the warp that destabilized chaos operations across the sector. The orcs noticed last. They always did. A massive orc warboss, drawn by the escalating carnage, bellowed challenges from the surface of Helior Prime, gathering his Wa into a single, roaring horde. Ghost Rider rode into their midst without slowing, hellfire blazing as orcs laughed and charged, thrilled by the challenge. Here, judgment was different. Orcs did not feel guilt. They did not fear damnation, but they understood strength and loss. Ghost Rider targeted their engines, their war gear, their symbols of dominance. He burned out makes and knobs, shattered banners, and annihilated the warboss in a spectacular explosion of fire and chain that sent the Wa into disarray. Leaderless, the orcs fractured, devolving into infighting and retreat. Within days, the Helior Reach fell silent. Not peaceful, never peaceful. But the war collapsed inward, momentum broken, supply lines shattered, command structures destroyed. None of the factions could claim victory. All of them had lost something irreplaceable. Billions still lay dead. Ghost Rider stood on the surface of Helior Prime afterward, flames low as he looked out over a battlefield littered with the wreckage of 3 empires' ambitions. He felt no triumph, only the dull ache of necessity. He had chosen targets. He had decided who mattered more. Somewhere, far away, Inquisitor Cordain studied the reports in grim silence. He's not conquering, she said. He's editing. An Eldar Farseer nodded slowly, and each edit changes the story. Ghost Rider mounted his hell cycle and rode away from Helior Reach, leaving behind a war that had ended not with victory, but with exhaustion. Judgment had prevailed, but it had not saved anyone. The thing Ghost Rider could not burn announced itself without spectacle. No warp storm preceded it. No demonic choir screamed its arrival. The immaterium merely thinned, gently, like breath fogging glass, and something stepped through that did not need reality to bend for it. Ghost Rider felt the absence immediately. Not null, not suppression, an emptiness where judgment should have found purchase. He stood on the broken causeway of an abandoned shrine world, its once golden statues toppled and defaced by centuries of neglect and war. Ash drifted through the air like black snow, settling on hellfire without burning. The spirit of vengeance stirred uneasily, chains tightening as if bracing for impact. Johnny Blaze did not mount the hell cycle. Whatever this was, speed would not help. "You've been busy," a voice said. The speaker emerged from the thinning veil, its form stabilizing into something almost human, almost tall, robed in layered armor, etched with sigils that were not chaotic, not imperial, not Eldar. Its face was smooth and expressionless, eyes like polished obsidian reflecting Ghost Rider's flames without reacting to them. "I was starting to wonder when you'd show up," Ghost Rider replied. The entity inclined its head slightly. "You burn champions, disrupt wars, reject bargains. The warp adapts, the Imperium hunts, fate recoils. You introduce unacceptable variants." Ghost Rider studied it. "No hunger, no guilt, no malice, just function." "You're not chaos," he said. "And you're not alive." "Correct," the entity replied. "I am consequence without conscience." The spirit of vengeance surged, hellfire flaring instinctively as Ghost Rider stepped forward. Chains rattled, eager to strike. The entity did not react. Ghost Rider unleashed the penance stare. Nothing happened. The flames burned brighter, skull blazing as judgment sought purchase and found none. The entity's reflection remained empty. No guilt, no choice, no sin. Johnny Blaze staggered back a step. "That's new," he muttered. The entity raised a hand, and the world paused. Not time, probability. The air thickened, each particle resisting movement as if the universe itself hesitated. Ghost Rider felt the spirit of vengeance strain, hellfire flickering as causality tightened around him. "You are inefficient," the entity said calmly. "You rely on subjective moral weight. This universe persists through absolutes." Ghost Rider snarled and snapped a chain forward. It struck the entity squarely and passed through, hellfire dispersing harmlessly. "Let me guess," Johnny Blaze said. "You're here to stop me." "No," the entity replied. "I am here to replace you. Understanding hit like a hammer." "You judge monsters," the entity continued. "I remove variables. Where you hesitate, I conclude." The shrine world trembled as reality warped subtly around the entity, structures collapsing inward without explosion or fire. Entire sections of the ruins simply ceased to exist, erased with clinical precision. Ghost Rider felt the spirit of vengeance recoil not in fear, but in irrelevance. This thing did not burn. It deleted. "You don't care who deserves it," Ghost Rider said. "No," the entity replied. "Deserving is inefficient." Johnny Blaze clenched his fists, chains rattling violently as hellfire surged against the pressure. "Then you're worse than chaos." "Chaos sustains itself through excess," the entity countered. "I sustain reality." The implication was clear. If Ghost Rider represented judgment with cost, this thing represented survival without morality. They clashed. Ghost Rider lunged, chains whipping in blinding arcs as hellfire roared. The entity moved with impossible economy, sidestepping blows by shifting probability rather than space. Each missed strike cost Ghost Rider energy, the warp resisting harder now, as if siding with the entity's cold logic. The hellfire dimmed. Johnny Blaze felt it a dangerous drain, not of power, but of relevance. His fire burned guilt, responsibility, choice. None of that applied here. The entity struck. It did not punch. It asserted. A wave of causal pressure slammed Ghost Rider into the shattered stone, cracking the causeway beneath him. Pain flared real, grounding, furious. Chains clattered uselessly as the spirit of vengeance strained to respond. "You are an outdated solution," the entity said, standing over him. "This universe no longer supports your methodology." Ghost Rider forced himself upright, flames guttering but not extinguished. He laughed a raw, defiant sound. "Yeah," he rasped. "Then why send you?" The entity hesitated. "Just a fraction." Johnny Blaze felt it the opening not in guilt, but in origin. This thing was built to conclude problems, not to question why it still existed. Ghost Rider changed tactics. He stopped judging. Instead, he turned the penance stare inward. Hellfire flared not outward at the entity, but inward, igniting the spirit of vengeance's core mandate. Johnny Blaze anchored himself to choice, to the act of deciding to bear judgment rather than automate it. The flames surged, stabilizing not brighter, but heavier. The entity recoiled slightly. Unexpected variable, it noted. You don't get to decide what matters, Ghost Rider said, stepping forward despite the pain. You just clean up after people who do. He slammed his chains into the ground, hellfire spreading outward in a controlled ring, not burning the entity, but marking the space. Consequences ignited, causality thickening, forcing the entity to exist within the moment rather than outside it. For the first time, resistance appeared. The entity staggered as probability snapped back into alignment, its form flickering. This inefficiency is unacceptable, it said sharply. Too bad, Ghost Rider replied. It's called living. With a final surge, he wrapped his chains around the entity not to burn it, but to anchor it. Hellfire roared, not consuming, but binding, forcing the construct into a stable state it had never needed before. The entity screamed not in pain, but in error. Then it shattered. Not destroyed. Dispersed. Fragments of function scattered back into the warp, their purpose unresolved, their conclusion denied. Ghost Rider collapsed to one knee as the pressure lifted, flames dimming dangerously low. The spirit of vengeance pulsed weakly, exhausted but intact. He had won. Barely. Somewhere far away, Inquisitor Cordain read the astropathic fallout with growing dread. He stopped something, she whispered. Something we didn't even know existed. An Eldar Farseer closed her eyes, threads of fate fraying and reweaving violently. He chose uncertainty, she said. The galaxy survives another day because of it. Ghost Rider stood slowly, hellfire stabilizing into a steady, quiet burn. Judgment had limits, and now he knew exactly where they were. The warp did not close behind Ghost Rider when he crossed its threshold. It noticed. There was no horizon in the Imperium, no ground beneath the Hell Cycle's burning wheels, only a churning ocean of color and intention that recoiled as he rode across it. The hellfire flared instinctively, forming a burning path through unreality, as chains rattled and sparked against concepts that had never known resistance. This was not a place meant for judgment. That was why he had come. Johnny Blaze felt the spirit of vengeance strain. Its presence stretched thin but resolute. The warp pressed in from all sides, not attacking directly, but reacting, reshaping itself around his passage like flesh around a blade. Demonic forms drifted at the edges of perception, watching, whispering, calculating whether this intrusion was worth the cost. Ghost Rider did not slow. Every rotation of the Hell Cycle's wheels burned causality into the Imperium, forcing the warp to acknowledge sequence, consequence, and direction. The act was exhausting. Each second a grinding contest of will against a realm that existed to defy it. Yeah, Johnny Blaze muttered through clenched teeth. I feel the same way. The first resistance manifested as architecture. Impossible spires rose from the warp's depths, forged from belief and hunger, their surfaces crawling with screaming faces and blasphemous scripture. They were not fortresses in any physical sense, but concentrations of influence, places where daemons gathered strength and gods brushed reality without fully entering it. Ghost Rider rode straight toward the nearest one. Daemons swarmed to intercept him, their forms shifting wildly as they attacked with claws, talons, and warp-borne weapons that screamed with stolen souls. Hellfire lashed out in controlled arcs, chains snapping with brutal efficiency as Ghost Rider carved a path through them. Here, guilt meant nothing. Judgment took another form. He burned claims. Daemons shrieked as their ownership of atrocities unraveled, their right to torment challenged by an authority that did not recognize the warp's rules. Each destruction sent shockwaves rippling outward, destabilizing nearby manifestations. The spire cracked, not physically, but ideologically. Its foundation belief in inevitability fractured under the weight of consequence. With a roar like a collapsing cathedral, it imploded, dragging daemons and warp stuff inward as Ghost Rider accelerated away from the backlash. The warp screamed. For the first time, it screamed in something like pain. Further in, resistance intensified. Warp currents surged, twisting space around Ghost Rider in violent spirals meant to disorient and scatter him across unreality. He leaned into the pressure, chains anchoring him to the path he burned, hellfire roaring brighter as the spirit of vengeance dug in. "You don't get to ignore this anymore," Johnny Blaze growled. A presence loomed ahead, vast and oppressive. Not a god, not fully, but an aggregation of will and worship that brushed against divinity. It watched Ghost Rider approach with something like amusement, its voice echoing across the Imperium. "Little flame," it purred. "You trespass in eternity." Ghost Rider did not answer with words. He revved the hell cycle and launched himself forward, chain snapping out to wrap around a protrusion of warp mass. Hellfire surged along the links as he yanked, tearing loose a fragment of the entity's presence and dragging it screaming into coherence. The entity recoiled, laughter turning to rage. "You cannot judge us," it snarled. "We are consequence." Ghost Rider skidded to a halt, flames flaring as he stood, chains blazing in his grip. "No," he said. "Your exploitation." The penance stare flared not at the entity's consciousness, but at its impact. Every war prolonged, every soul twisted, every atrocity incentivized rather than punished, burned through the connection like acid. The entity shrieked as hellfire tore away layers of influence, stripping it down to something smaller, weaker. The warp convulsed violently. Psychic shockwaves rippled outward, tearing through demonic realms and causing lesser entities to collapse or flee. The Imperium fought back, pressure mounting, trying to drown Ghost Rider in sheer magnitude. He staggered, flames guttering dangerously low. "Almost there," Johnny Blaze hissed, forcing himself upright. The spirit of vengeance surged, strained but unbroken, as Ghost Rider drove the hellfire deeper, not seeking to destroy the warp, an impossibility, but to scar it, to leave a mark that would not fade when he was gone. With a final roar, he released the chain. The entity recoiled, its form unraveling as Ghost Rider tore a burning gash through the surrounding warp. The wound did not close immediately. Consequence lingered there, raw and exposed, a reminder that the Imperium was not untouchable. Ghost Rider turned and rode. The return was worse. The warp resisted his departure with furious intensity, currents surging to tear him apart, daemons lunging in desperate waves. Hellfire flared weakly now, the spirit of vengeance running on fumes as Johnny Blaze focused on one thing only: endure. At last, the pressure eased. Reality slammed back into place as Ghost Rider burst from the warp above a barren world, crashing into real space in a storm of fire and shattered atmosphere. He hit the ground hard, carving a burning trench through rock before coming to rest. Silence followed. Johnny Blaze lay still for a long moment, skull flames dim and flickering. The spirit of vengeance pulsed weakly, exhausted but alive. He had not won, but he had proven something. The warp could be hurt. Far away, psychers across the galaxy reeled as the Imperium shifted subtly, its behavior altered by a scar that would never fully heal. Chaos adapted, but cautiously now. Imperial astropaths whispered of turbulence and burning paths where none had existed before. And somewhere deep within the warp, ancient powers withdrew their attention, no longer amused. Ghost Rider stood slowly, hellfire stabilizing into a steady glow. The Imperium remembered him now. That would have consequences. The Emperor did not speak. That alone told Ghost Rider everything he needed to know. Holy Terra burned beneath a shroud of unending activity, orbital plates layered like the armor of a god, void traffic threading, impossible vectors, prayer signals saturating the warp so densely they formed a psychic corona visible even from real space's edge. This was not merely a world. It was a gravitational well of belief, bending causality through sheer faith. Ghost Rider did not land on Terra. He did not need to. He stood upon a dead moon at the system's edge, hell cycle idle, flames subdued but steady, chains hanging loose at his sides. Even here, the Emperor's presence pressed against him not as hostility, not as welcome, but as weight. Billions of minds aligned in worship formed a psychic mass rivaling any warp god, and it watched him in absolute silence. Johnny Blaze felt the spirit of vengeance tense. "This is where you draw the line," he muttered. The warp around Terra was different, calmer, paradoxically. Not because it was weak, but because it was dominated. The Emperor's shadow, vast, fractured, sustained by sacrifice, kept the Imperium in check through brute metaphysical authority. Ghost Rider's hellfire flickered, reacting to something that was neither chaos nor absence. Divinity, sustained by atrocity. "You know why I'm here," Johnny Blaze said aloud, voice echoing faintly across the moon's barren surface. There was no answer, but there was response. A pressure shifted, subtle, immense as something noticed him noticing it. The Astronomicon flared brighter, its psychic beacon cutting a sharper path through the warp. Not a threat, a declaration. Ghost Rider stepped forward, chains rattling softly as he crossed an invisible threshold. The spirit of vengeance surged, not in anger, but in grim recognition. This was not a monster to burn. This was a system. "You hold the line," Ghost Rider said. "I get that. I've done the same." The Emperor did not deny it. Images surfaced unbidden, drawn not from the Emperor's will, but from the psychic residue saturating the system. Endless wars fought to buy time. Worlds sacrificed to prevent worse outcomes. Innocence condemned so humanity might endure another century. Ghost Rider felt the familiar tension coil in his chest. "You call this necessity," he continued. "So does everyone who ever crossed the line." The pressure increased slightly. Not anger, not guilt. Resolve. Johnny Blaze clenched his fists, hellfire flaring brighter as he anchored himself against the psychic tide. "Here's the problem," he said. "You don't feel the weight anymore." That struck something. The Astronomicon's pulse wavered, just for a heartbeat. Not because the Emperor was weak, but because the accusation landed closer than any attack could have. Ghost Rider stepped closer to the system's heart, flames reflecting off distant orbital structures like burning stars. "You've outsourced judgment," he said, "turned it into doctrine, bureaucracy, numbers on a slate." He raised a chain not to strike, but to indicate. "Every atrocity committed in your name becomes someone else's responsibility. That's not leadership, that's insulation." The warp shuddered faintly, reacting to the tension between two forces that did not belong to it. For a moment, just a moment, Johnny Blaze felt something press back that was not faith. Weariness. The Emperor did not speak, but the silence changed. It deepened, carrying centuries of calculation and loss. Ghost Rider felt the truth of it then, not justification, not absolution, but exhaustion on a scale that crushed stars. "You're not wrong," Johnny Blaze said quietly, "but you're not right either." The spirit of vengeance stirred, urging judgment, urging fire. Johnny Blaze resisted. "This isn't my call," he said. "I don't burn pillars that hold everything up, even when they're stained." The pressure eased slightly. Ghost Rider turned away from Terra, flames dimming as the Hell Cycle's engine growled to life. "But hear this," he said, voice carrying across vacuum and belief alike. "Your shadow reaches far, and everything it touches thinks survival, excuses anything." He mounted the Hell Cycle. "I'm not here to overthrow you," Ghost Rider continued. "I'm here to remind this galaxy that necessity doesn't erase responsibility." For the first time, something like acknowledgement rippled through the psychic mass surrounding Terra. Not approval, not condemnation, recognition. As Ghost Rider rode away from the system, the Astronomicon stabilized, its light burning as fiercely as ever. But something had changed. Not in doctrine, not in command, in awareness. Far below, Inquisitor Cordain stood in a silent chamber, staring at astropathic readouts she did not fully understand. "He went to Terra," she whispered. An aide swallowed hard. Did he attack?" Cordain shook her head slowly. "No, he chose not to." Elsewhere, Eldar Farseers felt the skein tighten, then relax, futures reweaving around a point that had nearly snapped. Chaos recoiled, unsettled by a power that had confronted the Emperor and walked away intact. Ghost Rider rode on, hellfire steady, chains quiet. He had not judged the Emperor. He had judged the idea that power absolved consequence, and the galaxy would feel that choice for a long time. Ghost Rider did not settle into legend. Legends implied endings, fixed meanings, stories that could be told the same way twice. What he became instead was something far more unsettling to the 41st millennium, a variable that never stabilized. Years passed, measured not in calendars, but in wars that failed to reach their expected conclusions. Across Imperial space, reports accumulated in sealed vaults and forbidden data tombs. Conflicts disrupted without conquest. Crusades stalled when key figures vanished in fire and chain. Chaos incursions that burned brightly, then collapsed inward as if something had severed their momentum at precisely the wrong moment. No banners were raised in his name. No cult formed around him that lasted. Those who tried to worship the burning skull found their idols melted to slag, their prophets left alive but terrified, stripped of conviction rather than life. Ghost Rider did not tolerate devotion. Judgment demanded accountability, not surrender. Johnny Blaze rode alone, world to world, sector to sector. Sometimes he intervened directly, tearing through tyrants and warlords whose choices had crossed a line even this universe could not afford. Other times, he watched measuring, weighing, letting horrors play out, because stopping them would only birth worse ones downstream. Each decision etched itself into him, not as guilt, but as weight. The spirit of vengeance remained constant, but it had changed, not weakened, not softened. Focused, it no longer surged at every sin it perceived. It waited for intent, for repetition, for the point where survival gave way to indulgence. When it burned now, it burned with precision that made its absence almost more frightening than its presence. In the Imperium, doctrines quietly shifted. Not officially, never officially, but certain inquisitors began to hesitate before authorizing exterminatus. Certain commanders falsified reports to delay mass reprisals, citing logistical complications that did not exist. In the darkest corners of imperial bureaucracy, Ghost Rider's name appeared only as a redacted anomaly, but the idea of him spread anyway. That someone might be watching who did not care about rank. Chaos adapted, but cautiously. The ruinous powers did not retreat. They never would, but their champions grew more careful, less indulgent, pruning their own excesses to avoid attracting something that did not bargain and did not corrupt. The great game continued, but its players now glanced over their shoulders, aware that some moves carried consequences they could not evade through faith or frenzy. Among the Eldar, Farseers spoke of the burning constant, a presence that disrupted fate not by dominating it, but by refusing to be predicted. Some saw him as a necessary pain, others as a catastrophic wild card. None dismissed him. The orcs told stories, crude, exaggerated tales of a flaming boss who didn't loot, didn't conquer, and didn't stay, but who smashed the biggest warlords and vanished, laughing into fire. Was diverted, split, or collapsed, chasing a fight that never resolved. Orcs thrived on endless conflict. Ghost Rider gave them climaxes without continuation. Necrons ignored him. Mostly, on a tomb world where ancient protocols activated too quickly, Ghost Rider passed through without judgment, recognizing something that had already paid its price in eternity. The silence between them was mutual and absolute. Johnny Blaze felt the years accumulating, not as age, but as distance from his old universe, from the simpler clarity of damnation and redemption. This galaxy did not allow for clean absolutes. Every act of judgment rippled outward, intersecting with survival math that spanned star systems and centuries. One night, standing on the edge of a void station overlooking a dying star, Ghost Rider dismounted and let the hell cycle idle behind him. The flames were low, steady, casting a quiet glow across his skull. "Still think this matters?" he asked the spirit of vengeance. The answer was not words. It was persistence. He remembered the refugee camp, the Helior Reach, the thing that had tried to replace him, the Emperor's silence. Each moment where he had chosen uncertainty over finality. The galaxy had not become better, but it had become less certain. And in the 41st millennium, certainty was often the first step toward extinction. Somewhere far away, Inquisitor Cordain closed a sealed archive and stared into the dim light of her chamber. She no longer hunted the burning skull. She studied its wake, charting where wars had ended early, where casualties had dropped without explanation. "He's not saving us," she murmured to herself. "He's slowing us." That might have been enough. Ghost Rider mounted the hell cycle once more, engine growling softly as chains lifted and settled into place. Ahead lay another world, another crossroads, another choice that would cost him something he could never recover. Judgment rode on, not as a savior, not as a god, but as a reminder that even in a universe built on endless war, someone still bore the weight of saying no. Ghost Rider never claimed victory in the 41st millennium. There were no worlds reclaimed in his name, no hymns written to mark his passage, no final battle that could be carved into stone and called an ending. What he left behind instead was something far more unsettling to a galaxy addicted to absolutes, a lingering hesitation. In a universe where survival had long ago replaced morality, Ghost Rider reintroduced a dangerous question. Who decides when necessity becomes indulgence? He did not dismantle the Imperium, nor did he cleanse chaos from the stars. He did not redeem the warp, overthrow gods, or crown himself judge of all things. He simply refused to let atrocity pass unexamined. That refusal mattered. The Imperium continued its wars, but not always as blindly. Chaos continued its corruptions, but with a fraction more caution. Xenos empires recalculated probabilities that now included a variable that could not be bribed, predicted, or exhausted into submission. Even the warp itself bore scars, subtle, enduring reminders that consequence could exist without worship. Johnny Blaze carried the cost of that resistance alone. Each choice weighed heavier than the last. Each restraint hurt more than indulgence ever would have. But the spirit of vengeance did not abandon him, because vengeance, in the end, was never about destruction. It was about refusal. Refusal to accept that endless war excused endless cruelty. Refusal to let power erase responsibility. Refusal to allow certainty to calcify into extinction. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But now sometimes there is judgment, and it rides without banners, without prayer, and without permission. The Emperor protects. More stories await.